Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you're watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Before getting into this video, I wanted to start off with a huge announcement, something I'm really excited about. So for about the better part of a year, actually, we've been uploading these videos. Before it was the weekly used gun review, it was the used guns of the week. So all in all, you can actually go see those used guns of the week videos over on BitChute. There were 27 of them before we took them down and then started this series. So I've got like over 60 episodes of this type of content, which I've been making for about the past year and a half, and I really appreciate all the feedback and positive notes I've been getting from everybody on this series. Now on top of that, I've had a lot of viewers reach out to me with certain questions on their collections, firearms they want to sell, either to get an offer from me or just to know the general idea of what their firearms are worth. So over the past year, I've actually been working with a really talented developer on coming up with a new website which we are launching today called WeBuyGuns.com. It is a site that you can log on to, and you can actually create an account and upload any of your personal collection firearms that you want us to look at and assess for an offer. Now on the site, we're not actually giving you a current market value. We're making you an offer to purchase the firearms from you. If you are not local here to Indiana, we provide you with a shipping label. You just box up the item if you're happy with our offer and you ship it to us. On top of that, when you get an offer, you will get a printable offer certificate, which you can print off and take around to your local gun store to try and use to leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get yourself a better deal, you can go ahead and just turn around and sell the firearm to us. But at least that gives you a baseline value on your firearm so you don't accidentally make the mistake of going to sell a potentially priceless family heirloom for pennies on the dollar. So we will of course give you what we believe is a fair offer in terms of the current market, whether it's a crazy market like we're in now or a slower market like we've had in the past 2 or 3 years. Of course, leaving ourselves a little bit of extra room to be able to make a profit on it when we turn around and resell it. Also on the website, there is a tab for our weekly used gun review episodes, which will be uploaded there onto the website as well. So if anything were to happen to our YouTube channel, keep in mind you can go to WeBuyGuns.com and continue to watch that content as I will continue to film it and upload it there on the site. Hopefully with a wider net of a more national audience of people who might be interested in selling us their firearms, it might make the videos a little bit more unique and interesting, as we can probably start providing more video or more firearms on the videos or do the videos more frequently. So we'll just have to see how it goes. Again, locally here it's been going pretty well, but I've already been serving the local market, so we'll be excited to see how it does on a national scale. I hope you guys go check it out. It's something I'm super excited about. Anyway, it is, again, WeBuyGuns.com. It should be active right now, so go over and take a look. But anyway, guys, with all of that out of the way, I'll go ahead and get back to your regularly scheduled weekly used gun review video. Remember, the point of this video is strictly to be entertaining and educational. We are not making this video to sell anything, to keep in accordance with YouTube's policies. Anyway, guys, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it now. Alright, remember the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses. Starting us off, I have a Sig P320 full size. There's one unique feature about this firearm which we'll go through, but anyway, the P320 did come out in 2014 as a follow-on to the Sig P250. Now the P250 was just like this, but if many of you guys don't remember, you don't really see them too often anymore, is it fired from a double action only hammer here in the back. Now the P320 was just like it, but was moved to a striker fire configuration. Now we actually opened our store in about 2015, and now we actually opened in 2014. And the P320 was actually, as it was brand new to the market, was one of our best sellers and maintained being one of our best sellers actually even until today. Now things are a little bit crazy with supply, but the demand for the P320 has remained consistent as Sig has done a really good job of updating and revising the platform as time has gone on, with like the X5 series, now the M17 series. They manufacture these in 9, 40, 357 SIG, and 45 ACP. The 45 would come on board in about 2017, so a couple years after these would be released. Now, some of the claims to fame to this pistol, it does have a really nice trigger pull and reset for a striker-fired firearm. Also, the main detail about this is a removable or the modular trigger group, which can come out and you can switch out your different frame sizes if you want to adapt or make the firearm somewhat of a different platform, whether it's a subcompact, compact, or a full size. The grip modules typically are about $50, so it's a pretty cheap and inexpensive swap. Also, the serialized part is the trigger mechanism itself, so if you want to buy a couple grip modules from Midway USA or wherever you want, they do not need to go through a 4473 background check or a FFL transfer, so it saves you a little bit of time and money there as well. Now, as many people would remember, in the XM17 handgun trials, the Sig P320 did win the modular handgun trials of the United States military, and it has been adopted as the M17, which has kept this in somewhat of a era of mystique. Now, this is a very, very, very early P320. The original sales receipt in the box is dated 2014 when this would have hit the market, and this actually has a 3-digit serial number being 266. So the 266th P320, I don't know if they have a different serial run based on size. I would think not because it is modular, but this is, I'm assuming, the 266th P320 that was manufactured. It was kept and not fired by the original owner, so it's in pretty much like new condition. So really, really cool in that regard. These aren't necessarily collectible by any means, but still, one day having the 266th Sig P320 will be a pretty cool thing to have, I'm sure. Really, really nice pistols, known for their reliability. There was a recall on the drop safety nature of these, where they would discharge. I think it was about 2017, 2018 when that whole thing happened. This actually has been back for the trigger replacement. So the way you can tell is the trigger contours are a lot thinner than they were on the original issued ones. It was not a mandatory recall, so you will still occasionally find the original sort of fatter trigger in there. Remember, those are technically not drop safe, so something to keep an eye out for. The P320s right now are pretty pricey on the market. Used, they're sitting on Gunbroker in about the $600 to $700 range pretty consistently. Of course, the higher variations like the X5s and things like that are going for a little bit higher, the M17s as well, but this is just a basic P320. But anyway, pretty cool. These don't really come in that often anymore. People really do like these handguns. If you ever see one, worth taking a look. Sig P320, really, really good service style sidearm. Okay, up next I have an SKS. Now the SKSs, I've had a couple of these on these videos, and they are pretty standard and run-of-the-mill, but this one's a little bit different, as you can see with this Tapco stock on. It's been kind of sporterized or updated, whatever you want to call it, which is a concept that is fairly common with SKSs. Now the SKS itself started development in Russia in about 1943 under Sergei Simonov with the development of the new intermediate cartridge, the 7.62x39. Now by 1945, after the conclusion of World War II, they would go into full production and be issued into Russian military service, but that would not really pan out, or the SKS would never really be a long-lived military rifle, as the AK-47 would replace it in service just a couple years later. Now there were some countries that did use the SKS, and more, I would say, in more circumstances, like China with the Type 56, Yugoslavia with their variants, Romania as well, and then there were spin-off sort of related versions of the SKS, which weren't actually SKSs, like the Rashid or the Albanian SKS, if you will. Now, as far as military service goes, the most prominent use of the SKS was with the Chinese SKSs, the Type 56 in the Vietnam War, as we would see, the United States would see within that conflict. You would see a lot of SKSs and AK-47 patterns issued in that war, and then later the AKMs. Now, in this case, if we look at American imports, the SKSs have been coming into this country for quite a while, since, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even prior to that. And definitely before the AKs or AKMs were coming into the country. So what a lot of people were doing were taking SKSs and trying to create hoc or ad hoc, if you would, AK variants, because the AKs wouldn't really start coming in with the FN manufactured Modis, and then later the Norinco variants and the Polytech variants in the 80s. Even Norinco would come out with a civilian version SKS, which would use a detachable AKM pattern, AK style magazine. Now, even through the importation of AKs, what a lot of people would do in the 80s and 90s and 2000s is take SKSs, which have always been very inexpensive, like $60 to $100, and even in the early 2000s they were, $200, $150. And they would take products like this and make a kind of cool, tactical style rifle, where you could get the rifle for $150, maybe a complete furniture set for about $100, and then so for under $300 you have a sort of a modern tactical rifle. So it's very common to see SKSs that have been converted into this type of package. Now, by today's standards, things like this aren't as highly valued, or things like this aren't done as commonly as they used to be. mainly because the untouched military version SKSs are gaining a lot more in popularity and a lot more collectability, as people are really searching for them in their traditional wooden stock variations, as they're being a little bit more coveted now than they were back when they were, $100 junker rifles, kind of like the Mosin Nagants, if you will. Some people still do this, but by and large, this type of stuff is actually bringing in less money than stuff that's got its original military configuration. Interesting thing about this sort of variation is with the Tapco stock, you can use these detachable Tapco mags. If I can get this out of here, I think actually, yeah, so the bolt will have to be back for the magazine to be inserted and removed. Now, these traditional SKS uses a little lip here at the front, which the actual fixed magazine slides into, and then you pop it down into the action. This works very much the same way. With the bolt back, you slide the lip down around that notch, push it in, and it locks, and then voila, you have a detachable magazine. Of course, this does not use standard AKM mags, but with this type of setup, you could have taken your fixed capacity 10 round SKS and turned it into a evil, high capacity assault rifle, if you will, which is kind of the philosophy when things like this were done. Price point on these with the Tapco stocks, like I said, SKSs of any stripe are really going up, but I'm seeing these in about the $400 to $500 price point, all kitted out like this. So you can also do the conversion yourself if you buy the stock configurations. If you want to change your SKS into something a little bit more modern looking, it's just popping a pin here behind the trigger guard, swapping out the fixed magazine, switching out the handguard on the gas tube, and that's really all there is to it. So pretty quick modification. So anyway, just interesting, worth pointing out. If you guys have seen SKS like this, that's kind of the philosophy from where they sparked from. Okay, now to go along with the SKS you just saw, this is also a Chinese SKS, and as you can see, as I was alluding to the original military-esque features, the wood stock, the fixed magazine, this is more or less in that configuration, but one little difference about this is you're going to notice is it has a shorter length barrel. Now the standard SKS had a 20-inch barrel. This one here has a 16-inch barrel, making this the so-called paratrooper rifle. Now this was not actually a militarily adopted variation of the SKS. There were no real military paratrooper rifles. It was really just a clever marketing term that was intended for the US civilian market. Now, prior to 1994, Norinco would manufacture different variants of the SKS. The standard military versions, there were just commercial variations of it, as well as the military variations. And then you had things like the MC5D, which was the Monte Carlo 5-round detachable. That's what that stands for, which is just like this with a short barrel and Monte Carlo stock and a detachable AK-style magazine, which came with a 5-round mag, but you could put the 30-round mags in it. And other sub-variations of the SKS carbine, again, they were only commercial variants. Now, in 1994, there was the importation restrictions on Chinese manufactured SKSs, and they could no longer come into the country as like commercial firearms from China, so things like this would cease to exist. Now, as this was not really a military variation of the SKS, it was still a, Norinco variation of an imported rifle. Like, we still have collector's value on the Norinco AKs and the Polytech AKs, even though those can't come in anymore. So this is really a part of that era, the civilian SKS variation. Again, no military mystique included on anything like this. Now, more recently, we've seen Chinese SKSs come into the market, but those were brought in as surplus from other foreign militaries, not from China. So that's why you see things like that. But as far as like a commercial, Chinese commercial-made SKS and any kind of weird, kind of funky variation, this was really it, and it was over in the 90s. Again, the pricing on these really does stay pretty consistent with that of what you would see on any traditional full-size SKS. I'm seeing these go on the market on GunBroker between about $500 and $600, which is pretty typical of where the other full-size Chinese SKS Type 56 SKSs are really going right now. This would have originally had a bayonet on it. The bayonet was, because the barrel was shortened, the bayonet would have been a little bit shorter, but all they did is they took a full-size bayonet, cut it down, and then recontoured it to fit the carbine variation of the SKS, if you will. But other than that, pretty cool rifle. Not really much else to say about it. Just another blast from the past of 1980s, 1990s era SKS imports brought in by China. All right, up next I have a Yugoslavian Mauser M44. Now, most people, when they see Yugo Mausers, they're seeing the 2447 or the M48. This is a little bit different. If we back up in time to the interwar period between World War I and World War II, Yugoslavia adopted the M44 Mauser, which was a design iteration off of the famed Gewehr 98, which was in part used by Germany in World War I. Now, FN would come up with a revised version, the M24, which would be adopted by Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia, of course, was not really involved in World War II to any meaningful amount. Post-World War II, after the surrender of Germany, 1945, Yugoslavia would begin coming up with a design concept of their own. Now, they would first begin by modifying the M24s that they had in their arsenals, and the updates began in 1947, bringing it into a more modern variation of the Mauser that, of course, we know and see today. Shorter version overall, a couple other changes. Because the updates took place in 47 on the M24 pattern, you get the name M2447. Now, a year later, Yugoslavia would begin adopting or creating a from scratch version or a copy, an at-home built copy of the Mauser Action, and that would be the M48. And then starting about 1950 until it was replaced with the Yugoslavian SKS version in the late 1950s, that would be Yugoslavia's main issue service rifle. Now, it was a little bit different. As you would see, the wood handguard would come up over the sight. There were no interchangeable parts really with the German version of the K98 Mauser. Now, backing up a little bit, before the revisions made on the 2447 and then the at-home version of the 48, Yugoslavia adopted this, known as the M44. Now, the cool thing about this, and you're looking at it right now, is it might be hard to tell the difference between this and a German-issue World War II Mauser K98K. The reason for that is this is a World War II German-issue K98K. After the war, of course, a lot of arms were rounded up, they were surrendered, they were captured, they were sold off as surplus armament to other countries. And Yugoslavia would have procured a whole bunch of retired or expired, whatever you want to call them, captured K98 Mausers, as the Germans no longer had a use for them as they had lost the war and surrendered. Now, for that small transitional period between about 1945 and 1948, this would have been the service rifle, just a captured K98 Mauser. In fact, the Waffen amps and everything are still all over the rifle, as it is a German World War II Mauser. Mod 98 is still here. In Yugoslavian arsenals, they did put their crest up here on the receiver bridge, as well as the factory which did the re-arsenaling, which would have basically been like repaired broken parts, refinished them, things like that. They did make minor changes, like a reinforcing lug was added here to the wrist, which was perceived as a weak point. This does have its original German laminated wood stock. In Yugoslavia, they did not use the laminated wood. It's cupped butt plate, which is still in the white. So if you are looking for a true German Mauser that goes on to have Yugoslavian military service and history to it, these M44s are really cool. Now, price-wise, they do fit in line with where the Russian captured K98s are, because it's essentially the same thing, a mismatched, force-matched, K98 Mauser, and you're looking at about the $500 to $600 price point in good condition. This is, of course, import mark, non-matching, which is going to be pretty typical of this, something in this kind of vintage. But if, again, you're looking for a true German pattern Mauser that's not $2,000 to $3,000 like an original bringback, that's functional, fun to shoot, reinforced, updated a little bit, really, really cool. Transitional Mauser used by Yugoslavia. So anyway, there's that. I have not seen too many M44s come through. Again, the M48s and M47s are typically predominantly what you're going to see when a Yugo Mauser comes up on the market. So pretty cool. Okay, up next I have a very popular surplus rifle in a lot of collector's circles, and I know this is kind of turning into the surplus rifle video, but I do have some modern stuff coming up. This is the Swiss K31, and lately, and I would say within about the past 5 to 6 years, the value on these things has really been exploding. These have been imported for quite a long time, and they did maintain a value of about the $200 to $300 price point, even around the time I opened in 2014. But up into about 2017, 2018, the pricing on these things has gone way up to about the $600 to $700 price point, and I don't see any signs of them slowing down. Now, the story here would actually begin with Rudolf Schmidt and Edward Rubin, who would come up with the first iteration of this design. Now, Schmidt would come up with the action, and Rubin would come up with the ammunition, together the Schmidt-Rubin. Now, the first iterations of the design used a very elongated bolt. If you look back at things like the 1896, the 9611, the 1911, the K11, they would all use the old Schmidt-Rubin pattern design. Now, getting into the 1930s, and this was designed in 1931, prior to World War II, there was somewhat of an arms revolution going on around the world as people were trading in their traditional full-length battle rifles. If you think of things like the early Carcano rifles, the Gewehr 88s, what the United States used in the Spanish-American War, the 30-40 Krag. These were musket-length rifles. By the time we're getting into World War II, people are thinking, let's go with a more carbine, compact version, which is what we saw early iterations of this on the K11. Germany moving into the K98K, like you just saw. United States, the 1903s, Great Britain, the SMLE, you know, or the Enfield. The number 1 Mark III and number 4 Mark I were about the same length, but it was a more compact package, which you're seeing here. Another philosophy, and you know, Schmidt-Rubin were no longer around at the time of this development, but the Bern factory in Switzerland had come up with a way of shortening the actions. You get a much smaller bolt, which gives you a longer sight radius and a more traditional layout on the carbine or the rifle itself. But they did keep the overall principles of the straight pull, which is what makes this stand out from other things. So instead of a turning bolt handle, you have a straight pull, which just comes right back. It pulls out the round. You have a last round hold open here. That'll eject out the top and then straight forward in for your next round. And it's actually a very strong action. There's a camming piece inside of here. It is a little bit weird in knowing that this can come straight back. You get a little bit apprehensive when you shoot them for the first time, so this doesn't blow back into your face, but they are a very strong action, and that's not going to happen. This right back here is your safety ring, which you can turn to put the firearm on safe. You have an iconic, what they call the beer keg cocking handle. Now, they would move these to aluminum on the K31. The earlier variations would be like a hard rubber, Bakelite material, and oftentimes you find them broken. Really, really cool rifle. Now, because Switzerland was neutral, a lot of these K31s and the earlier variations of the Swiss straight pull rifles are in very, very good condition. This one is a little bit worn, but most of the K31s I've seen have been in really, really good shape. Sometimes you find the troop tags back here under the butt plate. But it has often been said, if you look at the machining, the design characteristics, the amount of effort that had to have gone into a rifle like this, you have somewhat of a two-stage trigger pull, really nice for a military trigger. You know, it's often said things like, you know, if Ruger made a replica of this today, it would be a $3,500 firearm. You know, it's just the very precise machining in these is just a token of a past time in manufacturing you just do not see today. They are very flat shooting rifles on the GP11 75x55 Swiss ammunition, which is now getting harder to find. So lots of people love to pick these up, use them as hunting rifles, target rifles. They're just really, really cool, and also cool for any type of World War II era military collection. So anyway, the K31, I do not see too many of these. I've had maybe half a dozen in here since I opened, but there's always buyers on these, and they are very, very cool rifles. So if you're looking for something from the 1930s, that's just really well made with a nice trigger and ready to go down to the range, K31 is just a really, really good option for that. So anyway, cool to get that in. All right, up next I have a very popular, and also this is a beautiful firearm. This is a Sig P226 Engraved. I've had P226s on here before, and I'll go over the history very briefly, but I have been over it in the past. Now, Sig would join forces with Sauer, giving the name Sig Sauer in about the 1970s, about 1975. You'll have to forgive the noise in the background. They're rebuilding the donut shop behind me. So in about the 1970s, Sig and Sauer would join forces, and they would come out with the product, the P220, just of a lesser capacity. Now, the P226 would be a variation or a design advancement off of the 220 concept, which was brought about by the United States coming out with the desire for a new service pistol, which they dubbed the XM9 handgun trials, which took place at about 1984, 1985. Now, Sig had begun development on this pistol a little bit prior to that in the early 1980s, and this would be ready for the handgun trials. Now, Sig would introduce this, Beretta would introduce what would later be called the M9, and then other companies would introduce pistols for that project as well. Now, the Beretta, later the M9 or the 92FS, but the Beretta and the Sig P226 were the only two pistols to meet all of the stress requirements and material requirements of that trial. And of course, because the Beretta, being named the M9, won the XM9 trials, it became the United States Service Pistol. Now, due to testing, there were branches of the military that did show interest in the P226, and it was adopted with some branches of the military under the moniker like the Mark 25, for example. Now, the P226 has also been a staple on the civilian market, being manufactured in actually 22 long rifle, 9, 40, 357 Sig. and has just been a very popular pistol. They've come out with compact versions, the P228, later the P229, variations in the larger calibers, like I had mentioned, the P220, the P227. Just this whole concept has just been a very big success. Now, in Sig commercial fashion, what they tend to do on a lot of their products is come up with a large variety of different design elements, like engraved versions, colored versions, ones with different grips, ones with different sights. You have the Legions, the Elites, the Equinox. This is basically a concept out of that. This would be the engraved version. They are a beautiful looking firearm, wood grips, fully engraved slide, machine engraved, high polished blue slide, night sights, and has the other traditional lines of the P226, no rail. They did not make this engraved version for very long. It has in fact been discontinued. Now, at the time of retail, brand new, these would sell for about $1,200 to $1,300. Now, keep in mind, the base model 226 would be about $700 to $800 for a while. Prior to that, they were about $650, $700. The MSRP on them has basically been climbing. Right now, because of the limited availability on these and the fact that they did not make them for a very long time, has elevated the price beyond that, but there's not really a lot of sales data on where these are currently on the market. But anyway, just a really, really cool, gorgeous looking pistol. I know you guys are seeing some close-ups of this, but functionally, again, P226, but just has a little bit of edge, a little bit more character to it than what you get on other variations of this pistol. So this probably not purchased by the utilitarian user, but somebody who wants to maybe put it in a shadow box or has an extensive P226 or P-Series SIG collection and they want to just add something that's got a really nice curb appeal to it. So there is that, the P226 Engraved. Okay, up next I have a very popular AR-15 variant from Colt known as the LE6920. Now the story here would really begin in the mid-1990s, about 1994-1995, when the United States military would transition from a full-size rifle, the M16, to a compact carbine variation, the M4 carbine, of course 5.56 in select fire. Now, the United States had been involved throughout the 90s in military conflicts, which involved a lot of close-in, home-to-home type CQB types of operations. So a standard issue carbine, which was a lot smaller with a 14.5-inch barrel, would prove to be more ideal for that type of application. Now, Colt was the primary contractor for the M16s at the time and would go on to, of course, produce the M4 carbine for military service. Now, in the mid to late 90s, the United States commercial market was in the middle of the assault weapons ban going into effect in 1994 and sunsetting in 2004. Now, in 1999, Colt would come out with a civilian version of the M4 carbine known as the LE6920, but its main intended purpose was to support more of a law enforcement market, which is where you get the name LE6920. There was a sporter variation known as the SP6920 for the civilian market, but other than the semantics, the name, there was really no functional difference between the two. Now, there was a variation for the civilian market, the law enforcement market, and the military market, and the differences were such that the military version, as mentioned, was 14.5-inch barrel and select fire. The law enforcement version was traditionally a 16-inch barrel, semi-automatic only, but had the ban era features, things like this, bayonet lug, muzzle brake, pistol grip, things like that. Or I guess pistol grips really, for AR-15s at the time, were not really banned. But there was also the civilian market, which if Colt AR-15s at the time, you can see online, had all those featureless options, no threaded barrel, no bayonet lug, things of that nature. Now, when the assault weapons ban would sunset in 2004, Colt would continue its relationship mainly with military and law enforcement contracts, but they would start manufacturing in limited numbers variations like this for the civilian market. And as time would go on, they would become more and more popular. Now, these would see kind of the height of their popularity, I would say, around the 2010 to 2013 time frame, as you could pick one of these up for about $800 to $1,000 brand new. Now, the appeal to this is it is functionally identical to the military M4 carbine, except for, of course, the barrel length and the fact that it is semi-automatic only. Because these did serve a period in time when they were issued predominantly to law enforcement, there are law enforcement restricted, for law enforcement use only restricted markings on some of the early 6920s, and if you find those demand a premium, and they are totally legal for you to own, as they are semi-automatic with 16+ inch barrels. Somewhere along the line, Colt would adopt the moniker M4 carbine on the civilian version, which just gives it a little bit more of that military type appeal. Purchasers in the civilian market tend to like the things that have the more military type of markings, military collector purposes. The military version would be issued with a Knights Armament RAS system, and they would have a MyTech rear sight, typically issued with an ACOG, 6-position M4 style buttstock with the pistol grip. Everything else is pretty much traditional as you see it here. Flat top. This has a removable A4 carry handle on it. Now, Colt did discontinue manufacture of the LE6920, and I believe about 2018, 2019, and they do have a new version of the Colt M4 carbine out today, which is not really much of the same thing. In fact, Colt hasn't made a lot of their products in-house for quite some time due to their being in and out of bankruptcy and all that. Recently just sold to CZ, as you guys have heard. This is a earlier one. This was made in 2012 and still has the C-marked bolt carrier group, so that is a somewhat of a desirable feature. The later ones, of course, a lot of those parts were deemed to be outsourced to places like DPMS or whatnot. The appeal again to this is you have all of your mil-spec features on here. Your 7075 T6 aircraft grade aluminum, Type 3 hardcoat anodized. You have your magnet particle inspected bolt carrier group. You have your 203 cutout here on the barrel, your military parkerizing on the barrel, F-marked, is this F-marked? Yeah, F-marked front sight base, A2 birdcage flash hider. I mean, again, it's exactly what they were issuing as their military service weapon, but for the civilian market. So there was a lot of appeal to that, and for the $1,000 less mark, being able to get into that market just was shared with a lot of interest in people as sort of that doomsday end of the world firearm that you knew would operate and run in potential tumultuous environments and rain, snow, sand, whatever. So a lot of interest in that sort of thing on today's market, because the 6920s are not as easy to find and they are very highly coveted by AR enthusiasts. You're seeing the 6920s up in about the $1,200 to $1,400 price point, depending on where you find them. So a lot of that's going to be, of course, because of what's going on politically right now, as well as what's going on with the supply in the market. But these are really, really, really good AR-15s if you're looking to get into one. And I assume as time goes on, they will probably continue to increase in value. But anyway, there is a Colt LE6920. All right, up next I have a couple really cool AKM pattern rifles from Romania. I have a Romanian WASR imported by Inner Ordnance and a GP WASR 1063 imported by Century Arms. Now both of these are pretty early AKs from Cougir in Romania. This one being the earliest is the first imported Romanian AK. Now these would come into the country in about 1997 during the height of the assault weapons ban. Remember, that went into effect in 2004 and sunset, 1994 and sunset in 2004. Imported rifles such as these would have features like thumbhole stocks, they would have no bayonet lug, they would not have a threaded muzzle. This actually was threaded, but then a muzzle nut was threaded over it and then tack welded. The wings on the bayonet lug were machined off. These came into the country with single stack magwells, which would be opened up. And that would basically be the gist of it. Now, this is back before Century Arms more or less had the exclusive rights of importation to the Cougir AKM patterns. When Century would come on board, they would release the WASR 10. Now, the WASR 10, again, would get the name because it would have the 10-round single-stack magazine, which Century Arms would open up. Again, early variations would have the ban-era restrictions because they would come out during the assault weapons ban. Now, in 2004, when the assault weapons ban would sunset, Century Arms started bringing in the WASR 10s with the post-ban era features. So traditional stocks and pistol grips, bayonet lugs, threaded muzzles. You could get things like side folding stocks, under folding stocks, and because of all that, they called it the GP WASR 10, the general purpose WASR 10, because now you have all these functional purposes for the rifle now that there's more features attached to it. Now, the cool thing about the Romanian, the WASRs, the WUMs, the SARs, all of those variants, is they have been made 100% by Cougir and Romania, not US manufactured AKs. Now, modern WASRs do come in, and Century Arms does put the 922R compliance parts, the US made furniture, trigger control grips and stuff like that, but receivers, barrels, all made in Romania, which is pretty cool. The WASR 10s were made by Cougar in Romania with 100% brand new manufactured parts. The difference between the WASR 10 and the 1063 is the 1063 did use brand new receivers and barrels, but they used the PM63, which was Romania's military AK. They used surplus parts from those rifles to complete the build. Now, early on, there would be a bunch of rumors about the 1063s being of poor quality in construction because they have these old, out-of-spec military surplus parts which are worn out and beat up, and they're just going to run horribly. That was actually mostly rumor and really not true. And in fact, by today's standards, the 1063s actually command more money because they have authentic Romanian military parts in them. And because they're built from the PM63 kits, if you want to call it that way, most of the parts in these are typically matching. This one actually happens to not be matching, which is the exception and not the rule on the 1063s. Now, as those part supplies would be used up and no longer used on these, the 1063s would stop being manufactured and imported. I think it was around the 2009-2010 timeframe, and now you just have the fully newly manufactured WASR 10s, which you can still get on the market today. Now, there has been a stigma against the WASRs, which really spanned out from about the 2008 to 2012 period. When President Obama was first elected in 2008, there was a huge panic on firearms like this, go figure, and people were buying them like crazy, mainly because at the time they were really inexpensive. You could get them new for like $300. Century contacted Cougar in Romania and asked them to beef up their production, which they did. And because of the overwhelming amount of supply that they were able to produce and get in here, a lot of the firearms passed QC. So you would see things like canted sights and misaligned barrels and things like that. And they would start getting a bad reputation for that. Now, shortly after about the 2012-2013 timeframe, they were able to get their QC under control, and today, the WASRs that are put out onto the market are fine rifles, and not every WASR made between 2008 and 2012 was bad. You just have to be a little bit more careful, and this may have been made in about that time frame, but everything on here seems good to me. As mentioned, the pricing on these has escalated and escalated and escalated again when these were first on the market, and the first through import and then post assault weapons ban. These were $200-300 new. Through about 2010, they were about $450. It's actually, I bought my first one about 2011, and that's what I paid brand new for it. Before all this craziness sort of took off, we were seeing them at about $750, $800, and now we're seeing them up over $1,000. Now, the 1-1s are definitely relegated as collectibles and definitely coveted with Romanian AK or just general AK collectors. And these typically hold a price point between about $1,300 to $1,500 respectively. The 1063s right now, again, we're seeing between about $1,000 to $1,200. Some of that is, again, because of what's going on in the market right now. Again, some of that is because of the collectability of the 1063s over the general WASR 10s, which you can get. Brand new WASRs, again, when you see them on the market, they're up over $1,000 anyway, so it's just a little crazy. But they are, in my opinion, the whole WASR family has always been one of my favorite, and it's one of the really last true foreign-made AKMs that you can still get on the market today. So really, really cool rifles. I definitely love seeing them come in. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. We do post these videos every week. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave you off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.